Man's Inhumanity to Man. Introduction. The novel A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosni, one of the prevalent themes is man inhumanity to man. Man's inhumanity to man is prevalent with the Taliban ruling in Afghanistan. Women are almost treated like caged animals. They are stripped of all their basic rights. Throughout history, we have seen many circumstances where man has shown inhumanity to man. Man's inhumanity to man is a power imbalance and a superiority complex. The theme is present throughout the novel. The inhumanity shown by those in power and towards individuals in the novel, like Miriam and Layla. The novel tells the story of two Afghan women named Miriam and Layla whose fate become intertwined when they marry the same abusive man, and yet above all circumstances form an eternal bond with one another. The subplot within the story, respectively, are the occupation of Afghanistan by the Soviets, Afghan civil war, and the Taliban tyranny that took over soon after. Taliban's influence on men. Taliban is a predominantly Pashtun Islamic fundamentalist group that ruled Afghanistan from 1996 to 2001, when a U.S.-led invasion toppled the regime for providing refugees to al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden. When the Taliban came to power in 1996, they instituted a system of gender control which put women in a state of constant house arrest unless accompanied by a male relative. The impact the Taliban has on males also contributes to Rashid's behavior in the novel. As in the novel, women are seen as lesser and could not even choose their husbands. The Taliban influences men and causes women to be mistreated, and in the novel this is seen for Layla. For example, quote, "You will stay inside your home at all times. It is not proper for women to wander aimlessly about the streets. If you go outside, you must be accompanied by a mahram, male relative. If you are caught alone on the streets, you will be beaten and sent home." During the novel, Layla sneaks off on her own to visit her daughter at an orphanage. Whenever she is found by the Taliban during her trips, they sometimes curse to her or beat her so badly that she is unable to visit her daughter. Abuse of power throughout inhumanity. The act of using one's position of power in an abusive way. This can take many forms, such as taking advantage of someone, gaining access to information that shouldn't be accessible to the public, or just manipulating someone with the ability to punish them if they don't comply. Seen throughout the novel, there is abuse towards women and men, abuse such as physical abuse and psychological abuse. Miriam's inhumane treatment by her parents. Miriam is psychologically and emotionally abused by her mother and father. Miriam suffers the consequences of her mother and father's actions as she is a child out of wedlock. Miriam is constantly blamed for her existence by her mother, Nana. Nana frequently tells her how much of a disgrace she is and how she is an illegitimate person and a bastard child. Quote, "Nana meant that a harami was an unwanted thing. Miriam was an illegitimate person who would never have legitimately claimed to the other things people had, things such as love, family, home, and acceptance." Miriam emotional and psychological abuse by her father Jalil. He hides from the rest of the world by forcing her to live in a secluded hut. He denies her of rights his other children have. Because she is a disgrace to the family, he forces her to be married at the age of 15, which subjects Miriam to more abuse. Miriam, Inhumane Treatment by Rashid. She undergoes physical, emotional, and psychological abuse. Rashid treats Miriam as though he owns her. Rashid also expects Miriam to act in a certain way, and when she doesn't, he abuses her. When Miriam doesn't cook Rashid's rice to perfection, he forces her to eat pebbles, which break her teeth. Layla, inhumane treatment by her mother and her peers. Layla gets constantly teased by her neighborhood boy, Khadim. He shoots her with a water gun full of urine. Layla is neglected by her mother. Layla's mother is absent and is more preoccupied with missing Layla's brothers who are away at war. Their inhumane treatment Layla suffers from Khadim, and her mother is emotional and physiological. Layla's inhumane treatment by Rashid. Layla meets Rashid. He is kind. Rashid hides his cruel, abusive behavior behind a mask for Layla. Rashid is kind to Layla as she wants to marry her and have a son. It doesn't take long for Rashid to become abusive again. After Layla has his daughter instead of a son, Rashid is angry and takes out his anger on Layla and Miriam. Rashid mistreats Layla in many physical, emotional, and psychological ways. Example of Rashid's treatment towards both Layla and Miriam. Quote, Rashid demands, and judgments rain down on them like the rockets on Kabul. Quote, you try this again and I will find you. I swear on the Prophet's name that I will find you. And if I do, isn't a court in this God-forsaken country that will hold me accountable for what I'll do. To Miriam first, then to her, and you last. I'll make you watch. You understand me? I'll make you watch. End quote. The inhumane treatment by Rashid demonstrates his insecurities and need of power, authority, and control over Miriam and Layla. Rashid twists his personal values and religion to treat people inhumanely. The author is expressing the worst in human nature through Rashid's character. Physical abuse. Physical abuse is when the abuser starts threats, proceeds to violent actions against other objects, and escalates into violence towards their spouse in the forms of punching, slapping, kicking, etc. Growing up, Layla never faced any sort of abuse. She was neglected by her mother, who barely acknowledged her existence. However, she was always treated well, especially by her father. When she met Rashid and Miriam, Layla was particularly forced into marriage due to the fact that she had no other options. Her parents had just been murdered, her friends had all died in the war or moved away, and she cannot live alone as an unmarried woman in Afghanistan. Rashid puts on his kind and friendly act again for her until she has Aziza, her beautiful baby girl. Rashid is upset that she does not provide him a son, and he starts to become abusive towards her. He's verbally abusive by disrespecting their daughter and calling Layla rude names. However, it is not to the same degree that he verbally abuses Miriam. Rashid, however, does physically abuse Layla relentlessly, and because she tries to fight back, he only beats her more. One day he abuses her more violently than ever because Layla talked to Tariq. She spoke to another man, allowed him into their home, and showed him her face. Rashid believes woman's face is only her husband's business, so he felt insulted and disrespected. Rashid is the most abusive character. He is also the most authoritative character in charge of the women in this for most of his novel. He both physically and verbally abuses his wives countless times in the story. This is due to the personal loss of a son in the past. He is remorseful of this incident and was upset that Miriam could not bear him a son, but instead miscarried a daughter. Nothing Miriam could ever do for Rashid would be enough because she is considered a burden to him. He lashes out at her as a response. Later, Layla and Miriam try to run away from their hostile life environment. Their plan falls through. As a repercussion, Rashid beats them both while verbally mistreating them. One powerful thing he says to Layla is, quote, "You try this again and I will find you. I swear on the Prophet's name that I will find you. And when I do, there isn't a court in this God-forsaken country that will hold me accountable for what I'll do. To Miriam first, and then to her, and you last. I'll make you watch. You understand me? I'll make you watch." End quote. Psychological abuse. Miriam was psychologically abused during her childhood. The abuse was mostly from her mother and Rashid. With Rashid, he made Miriam feel guilty and made her feel inferior. Whenever Miriam would ask Rashid a question while listening to the news, after hearing her question, Rashid would say, quote, "You know nothing, do you? You're like a child. Your brain is empty. There's no information in it." End quote. Rashid belittled Miriam to make her feel insignificant because she isn't politically informed due to lack of education and or access to national TV. By mocking Miriam, he is causing her to lower her self-esteem, and by doing so, he is gaining more power over her. Physical and psychological abuse. Rashid psychologically and physically abuses Miriam throughout their marriage. An example of this is when Miriam serves Rashid a plate of rice after they had an argument. Rashid physically assaults Miriam while denouncing her cooking. Quote, he snatches her hand, opened it, and dropped a handful of pebbles into it. "Put these in your mouth." End quote. Miriam displayed confusion and he replied with physical and then psychological abuse. Quote, his powerful hands clasped her jaw. He shoved 2 fingers in her mouth and pried it open, then forced the cold, hard pebbles into it. "Chew," he bellowed. Miriam chewed. Something in the back of her mouth cracked. "Good. Now you know what your rice tastes like. Now you know what you've given me in this marriage. Bad food and nothing else." End quote. This abuse shows a combination of physical and psychological abuse. This displays Rashid's dominant power over Miriam as he asserts his power through abuse. This is the kind of power that the Taliban has over women. Discussion questions. What makes actions committed by humans inhumane? What should be done about the inhumanity happening in places like Afghanistan? When can you call an action inhumane? At which point do we draw the line between abuse and inhumanity? Do you think Rashid always valued men being superior to women? Explain your reasoning. What is the difference between men's violence against women and women's violence against men?